Welcome to Crunch Time with Cathy Malejane.
All right, it's 6:22 on Gabz-FM. Ga ile gore ke gone o ntse mo tsuba se re mama sa ga go tla ke gore ke re ra go amogela mo thulaganyong ya Crunch Time mo ileng gore mo go yone re na re bua ka tsa kgwebo mme ga ile gore o utlwile se re buang ka sone mo letsatsing la gompieno re letsa gore le wena o ikgolaganye le rona. We're talking to a gentleman who has quite an impressive portfolio. I'd like to share that with you and let you know that my guest is an experienced CEO and managing director. He is an entrepreneur and a governance leader. He has spent over 40 years in the diamond industry in a variety of leadership roles, both in majors as well as juniors. He's currently MD of Botswana Diamonds PLC, which is a London AIM and Botswana listed diamond development company. His immediate past role for over 5 years was as CEO and president of Rockwell Diamonds Incorporated, which is a diamond producer listed on the main boards of the Toronto and Johannesburg stock exchanges. James holds a degree in mining and exploration geology from the Royal School of Mines, that is Imperial College of Science and Technology at London University. He has an MBA with distinction from Durham University. He's a fellow of the Institute of Mining, Metallurgy and Minerals in the UK. He's a South African Institute of Mining and Metallurgy, Geological Society of South Africa and Institute of Directors of South Africa. He's also a chartered engineer in the UK, chartered scientist UK and a professional natural scientist South Africa. I have on the line with me James Campbell. That is who I am speaking to, and as already mentioned, he is the managing director of Botswana Diamonds. James, it is such a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so very much for joining us, and a very good evening to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Cathy, and thank you very much for such a warm welcome. I'm delighted to be able to participate on your show.
I'm very delighted to have you on the show, James. And in fact, it's actually very much in theme or in line with what we're talking about this week as a radio station, because we're touching base on our budget and the economy and just what's happening as far as minerals. Diamonds are not necessarily doing what we know them to have done. So let's get straight into that, James, and just look at what's gone on as far as the global diamond market. It's faced pressures in recent years. We want to know how Botswana Diamonds views the current slump that's going on.
Thank you very much indeed, Cathy, for that question. We believe this is a technical downturn and not a structural collapse, as many people might think it is. It is softer than many other downturns which have happened in the past, for example, around COVID or the 2009 global financial crisis. However, we believe that when the markets turn, and we believe that the markets will turn once an announcement is made in terms of the new buyer for De Beers, the diamond prices will improve. They probably won't go back to the levels that they were historically, because it will be a different market, but it will improve and it will be a strong, sustainable business. And that's one of the reasons, Cathy, why we are still retaining diamonds very much as a core part of our portfolio.
Well, speaking of that, you are retaining diamonds, but you have also started to look elsewhere, and we want to know about that because you've decided to shift focus in a way away from diamonds, and you're looking towards copper. So you've already said you're retaining them. I want to know in terms of long-term value, what do you see happening as far as diamonds are concerned?
Well, as the name says, we are a diamond company, Botswana Diamonds PLC. But one of the things that we do have, which many other juniors don't have, is a very, very large proprietary database covering about 95,000 square kilometers of Botswana. And that, along with fantastic data supplied by the BGI and the Geological Survey of Botswana, has allowed us to look using very advanced AI tools for not just diamond deposits, but for polymetallic deposits and in particular copper. So whilst the diamond industry is in a way sorting itself out, we are using our strengths of data management, artificial intelligence, and strong field skills to develop the company over the short to medium term.
Okay, so in terms of, I think that's a really interesting strategy, especially when we focus on the market that is selectively regarding natural diamonds. I'd like to just get your thoughts on something that we've seen happening, and that's regarding a marketing effort basically in the diamond sector. And we saw Botswana State Trader, that is Okavango Diamond Company, they had an ad hoc auction offering around 1 million carats of rough diamonds. I want to know if that kind of, strategy, these kind of auctions are actually helpful. Will they help stabilize prices?
And I think this could provide... Sorry, carry on.
I was saying we've seen sort of an ad hoc auction that happened through our state trader, the Okavango Diamond Company. So I just wanted to know if that was actually a strategy that actually would stabilize prices, or if that was more sort of a short-term solution, especially looking at the fact that this market is under quite a bit of strain.
Cathy, I think this is more a tactic than a strategy. Now, ad hoc auctions tend to provide short-term liquidity and help move in inventory, but on their own, it's not a structural solution. What we see as in your introduction, I've been in the diamond industry for over 40 years. Stabilization will only come when there is a broader recovery in consumer demand, and that will be marketing driven. And I anticipate that as the diamond business is a sentiment run business, that stabilization and that recovery will take place once the new owner of De Beers has found their seat.
Okay, so let's then move on to what Botswana Diamonds PLC has done. You've recently secured 8 copper-focused exploration licenses. I'd like to know what the thinking was and the reasoning behind that diversification into copper, and if any, and what, if there are other critical minerals that you are looking into.
Cathy, why we had to look at this is that some time ago, maybe about 2 years ago, we saw that diamonds were going to go through a difficult phase, and it was going to be unlike the other kind of difficult phases the diamond industry has been through before, in that there is a structural change. So we looked at what we had, and this is how juniors work. And we basically looked at the very strong database we had, and we saw that it was very useful to actually look for other minerals in Botswana. And Botswana Diamonds has been listed in Botswana for several years, and its predecessor company, African Diamonds, was listed in Botswana, and I've been active in Botswana for probably around about 30 years. So we decided to combine all of those strengths and then target the area of Botswana, being the northwest corner of Botswana, or Ngami land, which we believe is the most prospective for copper, silver, and several other polymetallic deposits. And we're delighted that the Department of Mines and the Ministry were able to approve our license applications.
And I want to remind the listener, we currently have on the line with us the Managing Director of Botswana Diamonds PLC. Mr. James Campbell is with us. So please feel free to call in on the number 3956962. You can also send a WhatsApp on +267 3956962 as we continue this conversation.
Sirunga. Power to engage your world is on 96.5 FM.
All right, 6:32 is the studio time. Continuing our conversation with Botswana Diamonds PLC MD. James, you're still on the line, right?
I am still on the line, Cathy.
Okay,
Thank you.
just needed to check. All right, let's talk about. You said you saw that this particular diamond slump was going to be a little bit different, and you then moved on and decided, you know what, let's take it to copper. I want to know, in terms of the current and future outlook for copper, what had you assessed, or what are you assessing it to look like locally as well as globally?
Well, we first look at these things globally, Cathy, because it, like in the diamond space, everything tends to be market driven. And if you look in the copper industry, there is a huge demand for electrification, power grids, electrical vehicles, data centers, and the whole AI revolution. So copper is here to stay, and there will be a significant supply shortfall of copper going into the future. And therefore, we saw this as being a particularly important mineral for us to look at, because in addition to that, our strong database, which I mentioned earlier.
Hello?
About the hello?
Sorry, you are saying that in addition to, the need or the demand for it?
Yes, in addition to a need for a demand for it, we're seeing Botswana is an emerging and incredible copper jurisdiction. If we look at the MMC copper mine in the copper belt of the Western Kalahari and the activities of several juniors looking for copper, Botswana could be a strong copper producer going into the future.
That's very exciting, but I want to find out, because a lot of the time we talk about value addition and just the fact that as a nation we really lose or potentially lose revenue because we export. So in this sense, we potentially are losing revenue by exporting copper in raw form, to the world, China, Australia, and so forth, instead of processing it locally. I want to know your perspective on that. Is it something that, we are missing out on? Could we, tap into that market and bring more value for ourselves as a nation by doing some of that value addition ourselves?
Cathy, it's an interesting question, and it's a question I'm often asked. And Botswana Diamonds is focused on discoveries, defining resources, and then building mines. And then we would look at downstream. But Cathy, I would like to maybe pose a slightly different question, and perhaps a more important question is, what can Botswana do to attract and stimulate exploration, for example, through investment incentives, and therefore grow local sources of production? Because that is, Botswana's been one of the top places in Africa in terms of an investment destination for exploration elsewhere. But how can it improve that so that many more companies like Botswana Diamonds and others will come and explore in Botswana and develop mines in Botswana, so there is much more production? And I think perhaps that is a more nuanced discussion than perhaps the obvious one of what about beneficiation.
Okay, so moving on to, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, of what we could be doing to do that, to attract more of these companies?
Yes, Cathy, I obviously wouldn't say that if I hadn't a thought around it. Now, a couple of things I think are very helpful. One is copying from something like the Canadian flow-through share scheme, which allows local investors, which will allow Botswana, for example, to make tax deductions on their investments in companies like Botswana Diamonds, because it's a risk-based thing. And then a second one is that over 99% of our exploration funding comes from offshore. Yeah. And I find that a bit of a tragedy, and it'd be wonderful if Botswana financial institutions and perhaps even the government through their sovereign wealth fund, which they're talking about, maybe makes a small investment to complement the investments we actually reach from overseas.
I love that. Okay, let's move on now and look at Botswana Diamonds. You recently posted a loss of 1,013,350 euros for the year ended 30 June 2025. What were some of the drivers behind the loss?
Well, Cathy, we're unlike many other companies. We don't make a profit because we don't produce something which we can sell. Yeah. What our business model is we raise money, chiefly on the London AIM market and maybe a tiny bit on the Botswana Stock Exchange. And as we raise that money for exploration and a very tiny amount for overhead, we don't have offices or anything like that, we then do our exploration work, and hopefully with the exploration work will produce good results. The share price will go up, and when we next need money, we'll raise money again. And this is how shareholders make money. For example, last week the stocks of the company rose 25%. And this is how people make money and as an investment in a company such as Botswana Diamonds, because it's a growth stock. It's not a dividend stock or something which posts profit and losses. So yes, we do make losses every year, but that is an investment in exploration activities.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that in terms of managing it, because as you've already said, this is exploration basically is something that carries risk. I want to know as a company how you manage the costs, the investments and the losses, as you're saying, as and when they periodically happen.
Well, this is a good question, Cathy, and it's something I'm always asked when I buy investors. And from a cost perspective, I operate out of a home office. I drive my own car, for example, and we're very mean with shareholders' money. And we put as much of that money into the ground as possible. We are very mean with overhead. So basically, the investors in the company we try and give them as big a bang for buck as possible. So and maybe the second part to that as well is that we supervise our own field work. We obviously go out to tender and do those kind of good things from a drilling perspective. And then what we look to do as exploration programs become more expensive, we look to joint venture, perhaps with much larger companies or much larger companies farming into Botswana Diamonds. And therefore, we don't have to raise as much money going into the future. So we look at an intense cost management approach plus a corporate approach of joint ventures and farm-ins.
That sounds really interesting. Are there any that you can share with us that have already taken place? And in terms also of just moving towards profitability, are there any instances where you end up owning the exploration equipment and so forth? Is that something that's already the case?
Cathy, we try not to put things onto our balance sheet as much as we can. But maybe if I could share with you an example about how shareholders made money. My previous company also listed on the Botswana Stock Exchange and actually, interestingly, had up to 20% local shareholding, as well as listed on London AIM, was African Diamonds PLC. And that developed the AK6 project, which you all know as the Karowe mine, along with De Beers as our joint venture partner. De Beers sold out to Lucara, and then Lucara bought out African Diamonds. And that might sound like quite a sad story, but the shareholders in African Diamonds made 25 times their money.
Wow.
And that's how, we protect our ordinary shareholders. Every director should do it anyway. It's the job. But we are very, very passionate about protecting our ordinary shareholders. So our shareholders did very well out of it. Botswana did very well out of it because you have an absolutely splendid mine there in the northeast of Botswana. And Lucara, of course, have done very well out of it because they have built the mine and they're reaping the rewards of it too as well. So that is the kind of model we use for we use for Botswana Diamonds. And that is the hope that investors in Botswana Diamonds will see a replication of something like this.
I mean, that certainly would be the ideal sort of investment, to give such an ROI of 25 times, what you put in. But let's focus a little bit on Botswana Diamonds and look at the share price, because on the Botswana Stock Exchange, it's been trading pretty low, if I can say, under 30 thebe since 2017. I want to know, in terms of that low valuation and the message that I can say that it puts out to investors holding the stock, and the fact that that's been quite persistent, or maybe perhaps bring me a clearer picture if I'm mistaken on it.
No, Cathy, you are not mistaken at all. You're quite right in your observation. But if you look at it in terms of the sector in which Botswana Diamonds was operating in before we made the announcements a couple of days ago, it's the diamond sector. And if you look at share prices across the diamond sector, I'm not going to name different companies, but your listeners can actually do that. We were probably one of the better performers across the diamond sector, but it's still a poor performance. And this is another reason why we have got into copper. So we can actually start to give our long-suffering shareholders a better return. and hopefully you'll see that going through into the future. And you will have already have seen about week on week our share price, mostly on the London Stock Exchange, because that's where most of the trades have gone in, has started to improve.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that, because you're talking about, the hope and the belief and trust that it will actually improve. I want to know if you think the market is undervaluing the company's exploration assets, say perhaps in diamonds and now in copper, or do you think that's going to turn around, especially now that copper is part of the portfolio?
Cathy, if you speak to any junior mining managing director or CEO, he or she will always tell you that management believes that the market does not reflect the value of the company. But I'm going to be no different from that. And if you just step back and think about it, is that the kind of database that we have covering 95,000 square kilometers is generally actually only held by majors. Yeah. And why is that? Is that juniors don't tend to last very long. Yeah. They tend to last maybe 5 to 7 years or thereabouts. They either get bought out or they fail. And interestingly, 90% of juniors do fail. And therefore, they don't have these very, very large databases. So I think that's one of our very large competitive advantages. And secondly, the way in which we're using artificial intelligence through what we call a glass box approach, which is not a black box approach. A glass box means you managing it from a geological perspective, has produced some very, very exciting targets. And perhaps if your listeners want to look at maybe a case study or one of the companies that we look up to in terms of what they're doing, and that's Cobalt, which has found significant new copper deposits in the north of Zambia. It's funded by people like Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Jack Ma, and it's $3.4 billion in valuation. So we're basically a minnow doing pretty much what they're doing, but in Botswana. So that's how I rest my case. That's why I think we're undervalued.
Yeah. I mean, in our language, you're saying I'm dropping the mic right now. James, let me talk about 2026. What are you, if you and I had this conversation same time, January 2027, what are you thinking would be some of the things that you would be saying to me?
It's a great question, and we have our annual general meeting tomorrow, and I know that investors are going to be asking me that exact question, which is great. And what I would like to have, and this is assuming that we have funding, of course, because you can't do anything without funding. I would have liked to have developed the targets in our 8 prospecting licenses in Ngami land to the point where we are either drilling or we will shortly be drilling and then declaring mineralization, whether it be copper, silver, or any of the other polymetallics. So I'd like to have gone from being a greenfields explorer in this area to actually starting to drill and actually discovering the minerals which we're actually looking for. That's what I would hope.
I think this last one is a purely selfish one, if I can call it that, to say exploration, drilling, anything that has to do with mining has a level of a need for beneficiation of the area that you are at, and just to make sure that even as you mine, even as you explore, that the environment is still taken care of. Is this something that you have put down on the table? Are these part of your plans? And if so, are you able to share with us?
Cathy, I'm also a passionate environmentalist, and a geologist is a natural scientist anyway, and we share a lot of the scientific disciplines with environmentalists. And if I give one small example, you mentioned that before I took the role at Botswana Diamonds, I was running Rockwell Diamonds in the Northern Cape of South Africa. And I'll give you one example. Shepherd's trees are very rare trees, and they are protected by the by law. And we mined around the shepherd's trees. We did not move a single shepherd's tree. So if you look at that as an example, and if you look at the work that we have done in the CKGR, in the Kalahari of Botswana, you'll find is absolute minimal environmental interference and social interference, because those two things are really important. And in the mining business, we call this the social license to operate. Wow. Yes, the government gives us a license in terms of the prospecting licenses, and that's obviously very, very important. But equally important is the social license, and that's granted by the local communities in terms of the way that we work and our communication with them. And of course, how we can defend things such as our environmental record too as well. And yes, if you don't have a social license to operate, you can't raise money. So we are equally passionate about that. And you'll see that I've made several public presentations on that exact issue, both from a company perspective and from a professional or personal perspective too.
I love that. James, my dad is also a metallurgist and geologist, so I know just a little fraction of some of what you're talking about and just how important it is to just make sure you rehabilitate the land, especially as you're doing some of these practices. At this point, James, I want to just wonder if you have any last words as we close off the conversation.
I think what I'd like to leave for your listeners in Botswana, that I think Botswana's got a wonderful future. I think diamonds will be there for 100 years from their original discovery, so there's still a long way to go. But I think the industry is going to go through a structural change. It's not going to be the same as the past, so one has to be innovative and look to see how Botswana can remain at its paramount place in the diamond industry. But equally, it must really get stuck into diversification of minerals in Botswana, because Botswana is blessed with a significant mineral assemblage across the whole of the country. And you have people like myself and many others who are passionate about obviously making a success of the company, but equally making a success of Botswana too.
And that is what we are trying to do, just make a success of this nation. James, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. I do hope to catch up with you a little closer to the end of the year so we can just get an update on how it's all been going. But for now, thank you so much for your time.
And thank you so much for having me, Cathy, and all the best.
All right. Bye. All right, and that's how we close off this conversation. I did say, your comments, questions, queries are welcome. I haven't seen any, but I think it definitely answers a lot of the questions that we were asking, but it does, for me, pose even more questions as to the direction that we are taking as a nation as far as our budget, and also raising questions about us as a nation looking to buy stakes in De Beers, especially looking at how other companies in the same industry are looking to diversify out of diamonds. Us, putting so many resources towards it does raise these questions. But we will be following closely what happens, and do remember that we will be following this as well on Gabz-FM. So you want to be with us, stay right here. This is Gabz-FM, power to engage your world.
Power to engage your world is on 102.9 FM.